The studio lights of Loose Women glowed warmly as the familiar theme music faded out. Applause echoed around the set, and the audience leaned forward in anticipation. It was meant to be a celebratory episode, one that would go down in the show's history for all the right reasons. Sir Paul McCartney was in the building. At 80+ years of age, Paul carried himself with the quiet grace of a man who had seen it all. Decades of fame, controversy, adoration, and loss had shaped him, but none of it showed on his face as he walked onto the set. Dressed simply in a navy blazer and crisp white shirt, he smiled politely, waving to the audience as if he were greeting old friends rather than millions of viewers at home. Denise Welch sat at the panel, her posture confident, her expression alert. She had interviewed countless celebrities over the years and wasn't one to be intimidated by legendary status. Alongside her were the other panelists, all visibly excited, and slightly nervous, about what was expected to be a lighthearted, nostalgic conversation. "Sir Paul, welcome to Loose Women," Denise said warmly as the applause died down. "It's an absolute honor to have you here." "Thank you, Denise," Paul replied, his Liverpool accent as gentle as ever. "Lovely to be here." For the first 10 minutes, everything went perfectly. Paul spoke about his early days with the Beatles, laughing softly as he recalled cramped vans, sleepless nights, and the thrill of hearing one of their songs on the radio for the first time. The audience hung on every word. Even Denise nodded along, smiling as he spoke about John, George, and Ringo with affection rather than nostalgia. But as the conversation shifted, the atmosphere subtly changed. Denise leaned forward, her tone becoming more pointed. "Paul, you've been in the public eye for over 60 years. With that kind of influence, do you ever feel responsible for how your words and actions are interpreted today?" Paul blinked once. "Responsible, yes. Controlled, no," he replied calmly. Denise raised an eyebrow. "Some would say that's easy to say when you've already shaped generations." The audience murmured softly. Paul chuckled politely. "I've always believed music should bring people together, not tell them what to think." The smile on Denise's face tightened, not disappeared, but sharpened. "Well," she continued, "some critics argue that artists of your generation haven't always been open to changing perspectives. Do you think you've always listened enough?" The shift was undeniable now. Paul leaned back slightly, folding his hands. "I listen plenty. But listening doesn't mean agreeing with everything." A ripple of tension moved across the panel. One of the co-hosts attempted to lighten the mood with a joke, but Denise pressed on. "Yet there have been moments," she said carefully, "where people felt dismissed, especially younger voices." Paul's expression remained calm, but something behind his eyes hardened. "Denise," he said slowly, "I've spent my life collaborating. If I didn't listen, I wouldn't have lasted 5 minutes in a band like the Beatles." The audience applauded lightly, sensing a subtle defense. Denise nodded, but instead of backing off, she pivoted. "Let's talk about fame and accountability. Some fans feel legends are protected from criticism because of their past achievements." There it was, the edge. Paul sighed softly, not in frustration, but in weariness. "Criticism is fair. Disrespect isn't." Denise crossed her legs, her tone firm now. "Who decides what's disrespectful?" Paul looked directly at her. "Usually the person on the receiving end." A hush fell over the studio. The other panelists exchanged glances. This was no longer a casual chat. This was becoming something else entirely. Denise smiled again, but it didn't reach her eyes. "So if someone challenges you," she said, "you consider that disrespect?" Paul shook his head. "No. But if someone twists intent, that's different." The audience could feel it now, the calm before the storm. Denise leaned back slightly, then forward again, her voice sharper. "Some might say you're being defensive." Paul straightened in his chair. "Some might say you're being provocative." A collective gasp rippled through the audience. The host beside Denise quickly interjected, "All right, let's." But Denise wasn't done. "Paul," she said, her voice firm, "this isn't about provoking you. It's about accountability." Paul's polite smile vanished for the first time. "I've been accountable my entire life," he said, quietly but firmly. "To my bandmates. To my family. To my audience." Denise responded instantly. "Then why does it sound like you're refusing to acknowledge criticism?" Paul leaned forward now, matching her energy. "Because criticism isn't always honest. Sometimes it's performative." The word hit the studio like a thunderclap. Denise's expression changed completely. Are you suggesting, she asked, that I'm being performative? Paul paused. The silence stretched. The producer's voice crackled faintly through an earpiece backstage. Paul finally spoke. I'm suggesting that this conversation has stopped being about curiosity and started being about confrontation. The audience erupted, some clapping, others whispering in shock. Denise's jaw tightened. If you feel confronted, perhaps that says something. Paul stood up slowly. The movement alone sent shockwaves across the set. I agreed to come here for a conversation, he said calmly, adjusting his jacket. Not a trial. Gasps echoed. One panelist whispered, oh no. Denise rose slightly from her seat. No one's putting you on trial, Paul. He looked at her, eyes steady. Then let's not pretend otherwise. The stage manager could be seen frantically signaling from off-camera. Paul turned toward the audience, offering a polite nod. Thank you for listening. Denise spoke sharply, are you walking off? Paul paused, then replied softly, I'm choosing dignity. The camera zoomed in as the tension reached its breaking point. And that was the moment everything changed. The moment Paul McCartney disappeared behind the curtain, the studio descended into chaos. The applause that had erupted seconds earlier faded into an uneasy hush. Cameras were still rolling. Red lights blinked. The audience sat frozen, unsure whether they had just witnessed a powerful stand, or a live television disaster. Denise Welch remained standing, her hands clenched lightly at her sides. For the briefest moment, her confident television composure cracked. She inhaled sharply, then exhaled, forcing a smile as she turned back toward the camera. Well, she said, her voice slightly tighter than before, that wasn't how we planned this conversation. One of the co-hosts shifted uncomfortably. Another avoided eye contact altogether. Backstage, Paul walked down the narrow corridor slowly, escorted by a stunned production assistant who didn't dare speak. The sounds of the studio, muffled voices, hurried footsteps, frantic whispers, followed him like an echo. A producer jogged up beside him. Sir Paul, please, can we talk for a moment? Paul stopped. He turned calmly, but the calm was no longer gentle. It was controlled, deliberate. I said what I needed to say on camera, he replied. Anything else can wait. The producer hesitated. Denise didn't mean to. Paul raised a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. This isn't about intent, he said quietly. It's about respect. The producer nodded, defeated. Paul continued walking, his footsteps steady, his face unreadable. Meanwhile, on set, Denise was trying to regain control. Live television, she said with a forced laugh, always keeps us on our toes. But social media had already exploded. Phones buzzed in the audience. A runner whispered urgently into another producer's ear. Trending tags began flashing on screens backstage. Hashtag Paul McCartney walkout. Hashtag loose women clash. Hashtag Team Paul. Hashtag Denise Welch. The divide was instant, and vicious. Some viewers praised Paul for standing his ground, calling the interview disrespectful and unnecessarily confrontational. Others accused him of being thin-skinned, unwilling to face difficult questions. Backstage, Denise removed her microphone and handed it off more forcefully than necessary. That escalated quickly, one of the producers muttered. Denise turned sharply. I did my job. Of course, the producer replied carefully. But this is going to be big. Denise crossed her arms. He didn't like being challenged. Another panelist finally spoke up. Denise, with respect, it felt personal. Denise's eyes flashed. So now I'm the villain. No one answered. Across town, Paul sat quietly in the back of a car, staring out the window as London passed by. His phone buzzed repeatedly, but he ignored it. His assistant glanced at him through the rearview mirror. Sir Paul, are you all right? Paul smiled faintly. I'm tired. Tired of interviews. Tired of being expected to explain my existence. His assistant nodded, understanding more than words could say. By the time Paul arrived home, the story had gone global. News headlines screamed, McCartney storms off loose women. TV interview turns explosive. Legend versus panel, who crossed the line? Commentators dissected every second of the exchange. Body language experts analyzed Paul's posture. Former talk show hosts weighed in on Denise's questioning style. And then, Denise spoke out. That evening, she appeared on a different program, determined to reclaim the narrative. I have immense respect for Paul McCartney, she said firmly. But respect doesn't mean avoiding tough conversations. The interviewer nodded. Do you regret how it unfolded? Denise paused, just long enough to be noticed. I regret that he felt uncomfortable, she said carefully. But I don't regret asking honest questions. The clip spread like wildfire. Paul watched it later that night, alone, the room dim except for the television glow. He muted the sound halfway through. Honest questions, he murmured. He thought of John, sharp, rebellious, allergic to pretense. He thought of George, quiet but unyielding when pushed too far. He thought of all the interviews over the decades, the smiles, the patience, the endless explaining. And for the first time in years, he wondered if silence might be louder. The next morning, Paul released a short statement through his publicist. I value open dialogue, but mutual respect must remain at the heart of every conversation. I wish loose women well. That was it. No accusations. No counterattack. The restraint spoke volumes. Fans rallied harder than ever. Musicians, actors, and journalists subtly sided with him, some openly, others between the lines. One tweet went viral. If Paul McCartney feels disrespected, maybe we should listen. Denise, however, was not backing down. Behind closed doors at ITV, tensions were rising. Producers debated whether the segment should have been steered differently. Some blamed Denise for pushing too hard. Others blamed Paul for walking out. But one thing was undeniable. Loose women had never seen a moment like this. Days later, Denise addressed the situation again, this time on the show itself. She looked directly into the camera. Conversations can be uncomfortable, she said. But they matter. The words were strong, but the audience response was mixed. Ratings spiked. Complaints poured in. Praise followed.